So Marty wouldn't even know. I think I could show up with him.
Welcome to the Authors Hour. My name is Fred Zerm, and I represent the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We are a volunteer organization whose mission is to promote writing and writers on the institution grounds and beyond by both supporting and supplementing the activities of the Chautauqua Institutions Writers Center. We sponsor several events every week. On Sundays at 5 o'clock in the Prose Room up on the second floor of this building, writers and listeners, 18 years old and above, it looks like you all meet that criteria, are invited to participate in an open mic session. You have about 5 minutes to read something you've written. On Fridays at 1:15 in the Garden Room, which is on the first floor of this building, we offer an informal critique session. Writers are invited to bring in 10 copies of one page of their prose or poetry for feedback guided by a published writer. This week, that'll be John Brantingham, who actually also teaches officially with the institution. So we're honored to have him. The other weekly activity is the one we're at right now, which seems to be general noise from traffic, but it's actually the Authors Hour, where each week we present two Chautauqua authors to read from their books. At halftime, I will make some announcements about special events that the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center sponsored. Also want you to keep in mind that there'll be time for a short Q&A session at the end, so think about any questions that might occur to you. Books will be for sale. Our one author has some with her, Christine. Susan has books available in the Octagon. And I also want to mention that video recording is being made of this, so you better behave yourself. And also it'll be available on YouTube. So if you want to relive this experience or share it with friends, family, followers, anybody you think might be interested, you can go to the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center channel, with that channel in the search, and you'll see everything, all the readings actually since 2020 when we all went virtual. Do you remember that? Well, let's get to our first author. Christine Fallert Kessides was born and raised in Pittsburgh from a long line of German ancestors. After reviewing her family genealogy and reflecting on her relatives' experiences, she was inspired to write Magda's story. Christine attended college and graduate school at Northwestern University and Princeton University, respectively. After a career with the World Bank in Washington, D.C., working in international development, she now volunteers with nonprofits that support women and families in need and enjoys travel, yoga, and sharing books with friends. She lives in suburban Maryland with her husband. Magda Standing is her first novel. Christine?
Thank you, Fred, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm really very honored to be here. I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool Chautauquan, but I'm already planted my heart somewhere outside. So this book is Magda Standing, is marketed as young adult because the protagonist is a teenager. The story is that she's a young woman of a German immigrant family in Pittsburgh in 1916 to 1919. And after being a very good student for 2 years in high school, her father tells her she has to stay home and take care of her little brother and invalid mother. She does manage to finish her studies, and at that point, the U.S. joins the Great War, what we now know as the First World War. And various things transpire from that. I wrote this story inspired by some elements of family lore. Everybody has family stories, and First thing was that my mother and her older sister had to take care of younger siblings because their mother was mentally ill. She had two unmarried school teacher aunts who tutored her and mentored her. They were very important in her life. My grandparents, both on both sides, suffered greatly from the Spanish flu. My grandfather died in his 30s, leaving 3 little kids. My maternal grandmother lost 2 siblings in their 20s. So the Spanish flu was always something that was talked about in our family, and my grandmother never got over it. She talked about it. And I had also done an ancestry search, and all the relatives I could identify were from Germany, mostly South and Southwest Germany, settled many of them in Western Pennsylvania around Pittsburgh. So I kind of had been mulling over these various things, and I put the story together, and I wanted to set it in the period of 1916 to 1919 in order to pick up this historical context. I also wanted to very much talk about the immigrant experience. As we all know, the turn of the last century was a period of a lot of immigration, and I was interested, how does that compare to today? And in 1920, about 15% of the US population was foreign born. And today, it's about 15%. And in both cases, you know, this obviously causes a lot of social churn. There was a lot of, back then, there was a lot of resentment of immigrants. The German immigrants, who, by the way, according to census results, there are far more people who claim German ancestry in this country than any other nationality. 15% of the US population claims German ancestry. That can mean, you know, it might be 1/6 of their nationality background, but it's the largest single group. And around the time of the First World War, there was a lot of resentment and suspicion of Germans. So I wanted to talk about the value and the importance of immigration, which is the lifeblood of this country, but also what immigrants experience. Girls' desire for education is a very major theme. Mental illness of a family member is a major theme. The mother's illness is never really fully explained. Back then, they didn't understand it. There was a lot of stigma, something that can still be the case today. And the importance of family is absolutely central in the story as well. Women working outside the home, which has already been a factor, but of course, with the war, a lot of women had to go out and work as the men were called up for the war. It was a period of major technological and social change. Now, there are 2 major villains in the story. The first is the war. The Great War, in most American educational background, and also in our readings and watching of movies, we don't hear much about the First World War. It's completely overcome by the Second World War. And, you know, for a number of reasons, it took place a long time ago. But also that we never were attacked on our own soil. And I think that one of the biggest factors is the US only actually fought for 12 months, was only actually on the ground in Europe for about 12 months. In Europe, it was raging for 4 years, and it utterly devastated, especially the French and British and German young men, as well as, of course, the Russian population and other parts of the world. But the US got off relatively easy. But it was still the first major industrial technological war. As we know, tanks, poison gas, bombing of, aerial bombing, mining of seas, blockades of civilian populations. All of this was done by both sides, and it was very technologically devastating. Interestingly, the rate of deaths among the mobilized forces in World War I, the U.S. lost about 120,000 soldiers in 1 year, in 12 months. Compare that to Vietnam, 60,000 soldiers died over a decade. And the population was 1/3 the size. So it had an incredible impact on the country. There was also a very strong enormous draft mobilization effort. Four times the number mobilized as in Vietnam. So the population, the entire population of the U.S. was very much drawn into this, even though we were only officially in it for about 20 months. Now, in the last 3 months of that, of course, they didn't know it was the last 3 months. this flu, the Spanish flu came. This flu actually started in Kansas, they say. They say it started at a military base in Kansas and was transported to Europe on military ships, which were incredibly crowded. There was a mad rush to get soldiers out to Europe. And everyone was in, at the time, the war over there had been going on for 4 years. People were undernourished. They were in terrible shape. And so that flu just spread incredibly fast. There were 3 spells, but the worst was between September and November of 1918. That's when my relatives all died. And as you probably know, it also struck young people, especially young adults. The CDC reports that Spanish flu caused the average life expectancy in the United States to fall by 12 years. COVID, we felt like 2 years. And just to compare, one last bit of factoid. Globally, 2.5% of the global population died from the Spanish flu. It's about at least 50,000 people, 2.5%. COVID killed globally less than 7 million, and that was 0.08%. Of course, we did have a vaccine. We had better medical care in general. And part of the problem with the Spanish flu is that the medical systems were devastated. All the doctors and nurses had been sent to the front, and populations were very weak. Interestingly, this is my last really cool factoid, I have to say. Pittsburgh is one of the hardest hit cities in the country in terms of Spanish flu deaths. And a good bit of it, I think, had to do with the fact that lungs were in not good shape. The pollution was terrible, and they had to keep the street lights on during the day in Pittsburgh at that time. The pollution was so bad, and the public health system also failed. So that's probably again one of the reasons why it really hit my family. So I'll do a reading, and this will be in the first chapter. So Magda has just completed her second year of high school. She's gotten very good grades, and she's starting back home with her best friend. Magda rode the trolley toward home with her best friend Lucia, who chatted about her plans to spend several weeks with cousins near Conneaut Lake, just north of Pittsburgh. Magda's family never took a vacation, but she looked forward to spending as much of the summer outdoors with friends and a good book as her regular chores allowed. Magda squeezed Lucia's hand as they parted near their houses. She always tried to go into hers alone. Her heart beat fast, despite the slow pace of her steps. Papa had completed his milk deliveries, and he and Mama sat in the kitchen when Magda entered. Crumbs of bread and cheese speckled the table. Dirty dishes from breakfast lay encrusted in the sink. Magda handed her report card to Papa first with a small flourish. The principal announced I'm in the Honor Society. Without a word, her father put on his glasses and read the card, rubbing his beard. He showed it to Mama, who gave it a quick glance and a wan smile. Magda's heart pounded louder when she saw his frown as he handed it back. Magdalena, you are a good girl and you make us proud. Hardworking and smart, like all of our family. But Magda's fear burst out of her throat. No, Papa, you won't say. Her fingernails cut into the card. I already said you do not need to finish the high school. You can learn the rest of what you need to know by reading, as we all did, while you help your mother here. Magda stared at her father with wild eyes. No, I can't. I want to learn more. Hear me out, my girl. But why couldn't he listen to her? You've already got more schooling than the rest of us. It was true that Magda's parents only finished 6 years of primary back in Germany. Instead of attending high school, her brothers Tony and Fred had gone to learn trades, and her sisters Kitty and Willa took paying jobs with their domestic skills outside the home. While Magda didn't envy the working lives of her siblings, it seemed they'd at least found paths that satisfied them. Her choice, her need, was to continue school. Papa, you always wished you could have gotten more education. And yet I didn't. My family needed me. Your family needs you to take care of the baby in the house. More useful experience for when you have your own family. Papa looked away when he said this, as if he didn't want to see the heartbreak in Magda's eyes. Magda turned, pleading, to her mother, who was gazing down at little Richie on her lap. Her hair was uncombed, and she still wore a soiled house robe. She didn't return Magda's frantic stare. Mama had been especially quiet and sickly since the child was born 2 years ago. Most of the time, Mama seemed detached from her own life, as if it was something happening to her, beyond any of her control. Exactly what Magda would refuse to accept herself. Magda clenched her fists and leaned towards her father. Doesn't it matter what I want? Her voice rose and her face flushed in resentment. He didn't answer. Her hands shook as she struggled to continue, knowing she had already violated one of the basic rules of the family, no talking back to adults. But her head was on fire, and she couldn't stop. I always brought home the best grades, and now you say I have to leave school for good to stay home? How is that fair? Even the principal said he expects me to continue my studies, and she put the words into his mouth. Not waste my good mind. It landed like a slap. Papa rose from his chair, his hand rubbing his bad hip. Calm down, Magda. His voice was hard, and he shook his head with the anger that Magda knew he was holding back in front of Mama. Your brothers and sisters quit school at work because we needed the money when I lost my job at the mill. I could hire the woman to look after us for a while, but we can't afford to keep her any longer. We have many more expenses. We must take care of our own. Your mother isn't well. So that was it. Magda was the unlucky one, to be shut in at 16 and made to feel guilty, too, for objecting. Hot tears welled, but she refused to cry here. Mama looked sad and dazed. Whatever her thoughts about this decision, she would not say in front of them both. Everyone in the family was used to Papa having the last word. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Magda reached for the toddler and took him from Mama, who didn't resist. I'll put him down for his nap, then go to the baker. Her head ached from holding back the sobs that rose in her throat. She had to get away and think about what to do. The house was silent as she left. She let the door slam behind her. The next day felt like the beginning of the end of Magda's life. She scraped Papa's shirt collar against the washboard. 2 minutes each, Mama always said. The time it takes to say one Our Father and Hail Mary. The corrugated metal surface bruised her knuckles, and the raw skin started to burn. She rubbed the rough soap bar against the collar again, but the dark stains refused to disappear. Papa's sweat mixed with the dirty air of the city made his shirt collars the worst part of the weekly laundry. Thinking of Papa's words made Magda's stomach burn. Really, reading as an alternative to the classroom? That worked for him. Papa read 2 newspapers a day, American and German, and she knew he could hold his own debating politics with better educated neighbors. She did love reading, but to feed her imagination, to see what was possible in the world, and perhaps in her own future. Most importantly, she wanted options other than getting married and caring for a household, to be more independent and make a bigger contribution with her life. Magda was upset that she had not prepared a better argument. Papa always called America the land of opportunity, but apparently not for her. She didn't want to compare herself to most young people in the community, whose families may also have considered public high school an unnecessary detour from responsibility. But what could she have said? That she wanted a better life than that of her parents, maybe even better than the rest of the family, and that for all her efforts, she deserved more? But that would sound too selfish. Besides, his mind was already made up. Now she would be humiliated in front of her friends. How could she ever face them again? Magda finished hanging Papa's shirts on the line behind the house to catch the afternoon breeze. She decided on her first step. She would talk to her aunt. She checked that Richie was napping in his crib beside their parents' bed. Mama was resting and didn't rise when Magda whispered that she was going to run an errand and would be back before long. She left the room before her mother could reply. Stopping by the small bathroom, Magda splashed some water on her face, which was red and damp from the exertion. Disheveled braids barely held her thick brown hair, but she didn't want to take time to redo them. From the bedroom shared with her sisters, she grabbed her hat, which the aunts would insist was proper wear for a young lady outside home. She slipped the money for the butcher Papa had given her earlier that morning into her pocket and headed downstairs and out the back door. She closed it gently, praying Richie's sleep wouldn't be disturbed. The thick gray haze was typical of almost any day in Pittsburgh. A bit of blue might appear for a little while, but the smoke and ash from the iron and steel mills formed heavy, low clouds that combined with the mist lifting off the rivers. Soot would settle on windows, on door sills, on white fences and white dogs, and on clothes hanging out to dry. Often it was necessary to shake down the sheets, towels, and everything else before bringing them inside to be ironed. Worse were the particles of grit she sometimes felt herself almost chewing and swallowing. She would spit them out or sneeze dirt specks into her handkerchief. And many people, especially men who worked in the mines outside Pittsburgh and in the mills, breathed it till they coughed a blackish froth. Papa used to do that for years after he left that job. Magda didn't feel sympathy for him now, only for herself. She strode along the steep brick sidewalks of Mount Oliver, its streets lined with close-set houses and small shops, many seeming to be cut from or clinging to a hillside. Her heels fell hard against the uneven ground, and she swung her arms as if to warn passersby to step aside. She arrived at her aunt's house with sweat running down her face, out of breath. Magda took several moments in the shade of a tree to compose herself, straighten her hat, and smooth her skirt. It took an effort to be decorous. The aunts were well known in the neighborhood. Theirs was the only influence in the family that matched that of Papa. Magda noticed that everyone, the neighbors, the postman and policemen, and even the Monsignor, treated both aunts with great regard. Neither aunt had married. They owned their house and taught other people's children, but never raised their own. The aunts had always been a nurturing presence in Magda's life and an inspiration. She was determined to find out what they could do for her now.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you for the historical background. I'm curious, I can begin to see how it's going to be woven into the story, and I'm eager to see how the other threads come together. As I said, I just wanted to say a few words about the special events that the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center sponsor. At this point in the season, they're all in the rearview mirror, so I'll just recount them briefly. We had a reception here on the porch back on July 3rd with light refreshments and lively conversation. On July 14th, we had a book fair, the Authors Among Us book fair on Vesta Plaza for Chautauqua-related authors. We sponsor a writing contest with cash prizes. That closed July 28th, and just this past Sunday, the 11th, the prizes were awarded. And if I had been more alert, I would have a list of the prize winners. But I don't. On August 5th, we had the Favorite Poem Project that had been initiated by Robert Pinsky and Georgia Court here on the grounds of Chautauqua. So I think that, I'm not sure what one it was. 16 years of the Favorite Poem Project, where people could read their favorite poem, as makes sense with the name of the project, and briefly explain why they like that poem so much, why it means so much to them. If you want any more information about these events, or if you want to learn how to join the Friends, go to chq.org/FCWC for Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. I urge you to join at this point in the season. If you join and help sponsor these different activities, your membership will be good through next season. So what a bargain. Okay. Let's get on to our next reader, our next author. I do want to remind you again, though, we'll have time for a short Q&A session at the end, and books will be available either at the Octagon for Susan or right here for Christine. This Uncertain Voyage, published in this year, 2024, is Susan Dworski Nusbaum's fourth poetry collection. Her books, What We Take With Us, Open Wide the Eye, and Alive in This Place, were released by Coffeetown Press in 2014, 16, and 19. Born in Rochester, New York, she received a BA from Smith College and a law degree from the University of Buffalo Law School. She lives in Buffalo, New York, where she raised her family and worked as a musician, teacher, arts administrator, and most recently, as an attorney. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including the Connecticut River Review, Poetry East, Woven Tale Press, Nimrod International Journal, Chautauqua Literary Journal, Calliope, Chautauqua, the successor to Chautauqua Literary Journal, Arbor Palette, Wisconsin Review, the South Theater, and a celebration of Western New York poets, in addition to the Buffalo News. She has presented her poems in solo public readings in several communities in the Northeast and Florida. Susan?
Well, thank you, Fred.
You can bring that down.
I thank you, Christine, for that intriguing and wonderful reading. Thank you. And to the Chautauqua literary friends and to Chautauqua, I give my thanks for this opportunity. I'm here to introduce to you my new book. This Uncertain Voyage looks like this. And you can go over there. I'll stay here, and if you want it signed, you can bring it back. But I'm going to ask your indulgence for just a minute, because last week's theme, if you remember, was awe and wonder. And that reminds me of what I call the Chautauqua experience. The experience of just being here, coming here and being here, just stops me in my tracks every time I come. So in that light, please indulge me. I'd like to share a recent poem, not yet published, and to sort of exemplify the awe and wonder of the journey here and the arrival in this wonderful place. And it's actually called Portage Road. And if you may know that Portage Road is the original name of Route 394. And that's how many of us get here. This also relates to the present theme for the week, which is water. Portage Road. From the rise on Route 394, you can see everything. Intersections and potholes, S-curves, deer crossings, hawks circling overhead, the road bounded by dark forests fringed with milkweed. And the calm of two waters, Lake Erie, hazy in the rear view, easing you toward the shimmer of Lake Chautauqua on the horizon. Push ahead like the Senecas before you, who dragged their canoes onto dry land, lifting them through footpaths and fertile fields over the miles between one lake and the other. And French explorers heaving their birch bark vessels through dense woodlands on their trek to discover the mouth of the Susquehanna and beyond to the Mississippi. Emboldened by the hum of tarmac beneath your wheels, feel the irresistible nudge of history, waves spilling over ragged shorelines, urging you forward across this narrow but seductive passage between two lakes. And now on to this uncertain voyage. It's about the ambiguities of life, not just the joys and the sadnesses, but our changed perception of what's real in our lives, constantly changing what we once knew and now don't, revisiting our memories our opinions, our family relationships, our visions for the future. These poems stem, of course, from my own life experiences, but it's my hope, actually my intention, that you, my readers, will find real connections in them to your own lives. We're all fellow voyagers, after all, finding new meanings in the uncertainties of life and a new appreciation for the world we inhabit. The book is in 4 sections, and I'm going to read a little bit from each section. The first section is entitled Beheld but Not Held. The poems approach remembered experiences from a distance, often seeing old photos, works of art, even hearing familiar music. Perspectives change as we revisit our memories. The first one is Born Yesterday. Every wintry Saturday, safe from the tramp of goose steps over there, my sister and I would read plays aloud from a collection our mother got from the Book of the Month Club. Best American Plays, 1940 to 1945. Those were the years our boys marched off and came back, or didn't. Snug under an Afghan on the studio couch, we divvied up parts. I, the younger, got butler or third bystander. My sister helping me with the hard words. She inhabited the important roles, timid Laura in The Glass Menagerie, the evil Count in Watch on the Rhine, Our Town, Emily. Oblivious, we breezed through scene after scene, stories about frustration and lost dreams, betrayal and suicide, hunger and war. Niggering at words we didn't understand but knew were off limits, like gigolo and slut and Gestapo. Pausing for a moment when Emily suddenly cries from the grave. I never realized before how troubled and how in the dark live persons are. It goes so fast. We don't have time to look at one another. Inheritance. My mother's table, small, marble-topped, found a new home beside a wing chair in one corner of my living room. Still wobbly, loosened during my childhood by a long history of use, weighed down by stacks of storybooks and novels, Majolica ashtray, an occasional philodendron. The assemblage so heavy its feet wore grooves in mother's green wall to wall. My inheritance, a cushiony lap, blue-veined hands turning pages, as vibrations of Schumann, scent of Este, swoosh of slip against stockings, settle around it. An irrevocable trust, this magnetic field. I'm heir to the air. And the second section in the book is called Just Around the Bend. It revisits life's upheavals, sometimes caused by tragedies and loss, life's interruption, inevitable, yet we do not break, but learn acceptance and survival techniques for the future. Because today would be my husband, Sandy Nusbaum's birthday, August 13th, and August 22nd would be my second husband, Ron Van Blorgen's birthday. I'm going to read some poems in their honor from this section. Ball Clock. Between chemo treatments, he'd retreat to his garage workshop, punching over the tattered plans to create a beautiful tower as tall as he was, working nonstop to beat the deadline. He sanded and oiled the rosewood, cut grooves for the ebony trim, formed joints, mortises, and tenons, fastened the curly maple face, copper numbers, and hands. Constructed a sliding walnut panel big enough to accommodate his wide knuckles for setting the work, enabling the chimes. After he hauled the frame upstairs, he placed it so the copper might catch a sliver of northern light, adjusted the movement, wound it on Sundays. During the darkest hours, the chimes stirred us, reassurance that the world was still churning. Friend who attends my lonely silence, now you rest unwound, chimes muffled, your hands and face motionless, but shining. Hush. On the morning of your death, as the moon began to disappear, I was startled awake not by the rush of departure, but by a hush, a whisper of consonance, as if a fermata had stopped the flow of time, marking the end of a symphonic passage, its bird's eye widening to recapture sonorities lost in the stillness. No doubt some sounds lingered that morning. Whir of the ceiling fan, water hissing in pipes inside the thick walls of our house. Surely branches scratched against our bedroom window, and doves spilled their vowels into the empty air. I could not hear the dawn because your voice was missing, and the day broke without you. This one actually has a lot about Chautauqua in it and the Writers Center. Birthday for Ron. I met Ron Van Varden, my second husband, here in Chautauqua. For 11 years, I memorialized September 1st with a candle, but today I had to check your obituary to find the date of your birth, August 26th. Information lost somehow inside the blank space in my brain. But I remember every one of those final days. You insisting we drive to Chautauqua to meet one more time with our Wednesday gatherings of friends. Your labored breathing as you slept in the car, reassuring me you were still alive. On the deck overlooking the lake, a glorious birthday party. Mary Ann and Georgia vying to sit next to you. Bob on the glider toasting you with his usual martini. Rodney and Gina serving you from the buffet counter. Plates piled with lasagna and bean salad. John providing not one, but 2 tall birthday cakes. And the next day back home, a celebration at a new Burmese restaurant with Madeline and David and their family. Pre-ordered specialties of the house, mango chicken and black rice papaya salad, spicy noodles, kap chai coach. Then another home-baked cake and a raucous rendition of Happy Birthday as you blew out the flames of your years. The gleaming embers lingering on tiny wicks long after your breath had stopped. And just because I'm honoring my 2 husbands, I'm going to reach back into my first book and read something called 2 Husbands Meet in Heaven. Now, my 2 husbands did not ever know each other. So I was kind of wondered whether they would, like each other. And so this is the poem that will describe that. Two husbands meet in heaven. Unlikely they'd turn up in the same chamber and be inclined to speak, the only common subject being movies or restaurants or perhaps me. But both fun-loving and friendly men, they might greet each other warmly, hug perhaps. The handy one would reattach the other's flopping wing. The neat one would brush sawdust off the other's robe. They pull up a cloud, pour a glass of nectar, and reminisce about their common experience. The thrifty one, complaining about my spending. The spender about my thrift. The light sleeper would shake his haloed head, remembering the sleep he'd lost to my snoring. The snorer would be surprised to learn that I snored. But both would cluck their angelic tongues, despairing at my annoying habit, leaving cupboard doors ajar and shoes where one might trip over them in the dark. They'd agree I gave most of what they needed in life, though I'd turn bossy toward the end. Then they'd deal a hand of bridge and with a couple of old souls, a game I refused to play or even encourage. This could be very nice, they'd agree, kicking off their sandals, enjoying the prospect of eternal friendship as a harpist plucked softly, no tipping allowed, and drinks were perpetually refreshed. That was the very first book, which is called What We Take With Us. It was published in 2014. The next section of the book is called Breathing, and it's a short section that deals with the dilemmas that our country finds itself in: racism, complacency, division in our country, and how our opinions and responses change to meet the needs of a beleaguered nation. Lady Liberty. On nice days, she hung the wet wash on the backyard clothesline to whiten in the sun. Her right arm raised high like a sentinel, clutching a corner of the bedsheet. Her left reaching down so I could hand her a wooden clothespin from the bag. Without halo or torch, this daughter of the tempest-tossed loved her country unconditionally, belted out "God Bless America" right along with Kate Smith. She was proud her family made it, declined to travel abroad with my father, insisting, "I'll stay here in the good old USA, the best country on earth." Surely she must have read of lynching and Japanese detention camps. Knew our own family was unwelcome in certain neighborhoods and caught, and once, more than once, had been called a dirty Jew. Today, bloodstains spread in plain sight across our flag. Massacres commonplace. Violence almost expected in grocery stores, schools, churches, and synagogues. Would my mother bleach them from her mind? Would she dry them in the sun? Would she lift her voice in praise? And this one was written in 2022, and it's called Ballot. Early voting at the Salvation Army. "Here's your ballot, dear," says the woman at the table. "Just fill it in over there and feed it to the machine when you're done." Outside, the trees are dropping their summer leaves, the air stagnant with an ill wind. On every corner, a homeless person. Bullets are flying. In this morning's news, I scanned the court's decision. War on Women, what's the headline? Bullets are flying. Catastrophic news for daughters and granddaughters, for freedoms in every corner of this benighted America. Bullets are flying. We're dying here, O God of good, unwilling soldiers in a battle we failed to see coming. Can we be saved? Is anyone listening? Here at the Salvation Army, a machine beats my ballot. Trees are dropping their summer leaves. Bullets are flying. And the last section is called This Accidental Habitat. Examines new discoveries about the universe, our immersion in the natural environment, and a new gratitude for our endangered world and our determination to preserve it. The first one is called Watching for Manatee, and it was written when I returned from Longboat Key in Florida, where every day I would walk out on the dock and watch the manatee. Watching for manatee. A trace of tropical suntan still colors my skin, now wind buffeted as I return to the northern dry cold. Inside the wintry solitude of home, war rages in Ukraine. On my screen, in my mind, its borders violated. As I search for tranquility along the shoals of memory, where immense elliptical shadows glide beneath the surface, whiskers parting ripples, bubbles dissolving in air, their shapes fade in the shade of a dock, drift to the far side, disappear into dark waves of seagrass, a murky sludge emerging in undulating pods. They do not lose their way, do not sense the danger of their dwindling habitat, or turn to watch me watching them. But I can feel their nudge as we press together along this uncertain voyage. One more. Oh. All right. Two more, but I will only read one. This is also about a part of the animal kingdom, and it's called. It comes from a newspaper headline. Here's the headline: Scientists confirm elephant in South Korea can reproduce speech. The elephant speaks of love. Why are we surprised to read that another mammal feels the anguish of isolation so deeply he learns to reproduce his trainer's speech? That Koshik, the circus performer, has taught himself the elaborate technique of placing the tip of his trunk into his mouth to imitate the frequencies of Korean words, the sounds his trainer, his only companion, made. Separated from his own kind, he scarcely remembers their comforting snorts and bellows, slurps and growls. What creature wouldn't find a way to greet his only friend? Koshik knows the power of words to bring rewards, nourishment, whispered endearments, the attentions of a trainer who gazes like a grateful lover into the animal's watery eye, leans a cheek against his rough haunches, and caresses his articulate trunk, spent with language. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan, for both talking about and demonstrating the power of language. We do have a few minutes for Q&A if anybody has questions for either of the authors and maybe for both of them. Any questions? back there, and then we'll get to you, Patty. Yes, Margo, right there, right there.
I have a question for Susan. And I do want to tell you that I found out I was half German when I did my family history, and I just was reading about World War I. What motivated you to do that as a novel and not as a memoir?
Well,
And by the way, I loved it. I'm going to buy it. Maybe I should read it here.
so why a novel instead of a memoir? Well, first of all, I didn't have enough actual background on the details of my family. They had not left letters. There were very few photos, nothing that was terribly relevant. And I didn't want to fake it as far as, as far as that was concerned. And of course, I really regretted that when my grandparents were living, that I hadn't thoroughly interviewed them. And I would say my advice to anyone is, as long as your older relatives are around, please interview them and collect those family documents and so on. So the advantage of doing it as a novel is that it allowed me to explore more. And I drew in the information from other memoirs I read, other fiction that I read, and so on.
And your vocabulary was just, I loved every sentence.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
After the question.
Oh, the novel was introduced as your first novel. I'm wondering if there's a second novel in the works.
I'm actually trying to think about a sequel. And it's a lot harder the second time somehow, because the first one had percolated for a long time. And I had already done a lot of historical reading, because I love history, and I had already done a lot of reading of that period. So now if I'm starting another one, I have to read a whole lot of more history of a period, and then I have to figure out how to do that. So, but that's what I'm trying to do right now.
Back there, Armand? Yes.
I'm wondering if there is a Quaker to your German history established.
Can you repeat the question?
Is there a Quaker?
Is there a Quaker? Did you discover a Quaker component to your family, your German family in Southwestern? I'm also from Southwestern Pennsylvania and have one great grandmother who was German and she's a Quaker. So
Yeah.
Did you discover any of that?
No, I didn't discover any Quakers that, could be identified in the background. I believe that most of them came from the south and southwest of Germany, which was the Catholic part of Germany. And I think it's possible that many of them came in the time when there was, after Bismarck formed the consolidated nation of Germany, he was kind of pressing against the Catholics and trying to control them. And I think there was a wave of emigration at that point. So I think it may have been.
Do you know when they choose?
Well, the farthest back I identified, and I didn't spend a lot of money on ancestry search, I have to say. But what I did was I think the farthest back I found was somebody coming from 1840, but most of them came around 1870, 1880, which was the peak period of the German immigration.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Oh, now we have a late one.
I'll ask a question of Sue. I've known her for a long, long time and loved her poetry. When was it that you first discovered, or began to discover, that poetry was part of you?
And the question is, when did Susan first discover that poetry was part of her?
Well, my mother read poetry to me all the time. So I grew up with poetry. And I had always loved it. And when I was in college, I actually was a music major in college, but a minor in English. And I took as many poetry courses, not writing, but reading courses as I possibly could. And then I used to write things, middle of the night kinds of things. And I came to Chautauqua one summer, and a friend, Mary Ann Warfield, many of you probably remember her, she said, "Oh, why don't you come to a workshop?" And I did. I was an auditor. In those days, they allowed you to be an auditor. And I thought it was great. And then the instructor said, well, you must have some poems. Why don't you just, let's listen to them. So I had a couple of poems, and I just loved the experience of hearing what other people had to say about them. And so I was hooked. And then that's when I started. So that had to be about, it was after my first husband died. And so it had to be 2000, the year 2000. So right here. Yeah.
I have a question. Do your poems begin with a concept, an idea, or do they begin with a line?
Well, I can't say that they begin with a line, but they do sometimes start with an image. And the image, there's a concept behind the image. And it's just, as you know, as a poet, it's just editing, rewriting, revising, until you get it the way you think it's right. So, yeah.
Are you ever surprised by it yourself?
I am, yes. Are you ever surprised by the results? Yes. I might start with an entirely different idea about what this poem is going to be, and all of a sudden something comes out that leads me in a different direction. Yes. Yes.
Final question.
I just have a comment. You inspired what you told us today, explain something that I noticed about your poetry, is that you have dual and equal talents. Beautiful writing and fabulous delivery.
Oh, you're very kind to say that. I thank you all. I really, I depend on my readers, so thank you very much.
Let's give applause to both of them. Thank you so much. Just a few closing announcements won't take much of your time. On the literary front, on Thursday at 3:30, the CLSC author of the week, Sabrina Embler, will be talking about her selection, CLSC selection for this week, How Far the Light Reaches, A Life in 10 Sea Creatures. On Friday at this time on the porch, selected readers from the two workshops, the very workshops that gave Susan her start, will be reading, community reading. They also read the community poem that different people in Chautauqua have been contributing to. A word about our sister art theater, that Kate Hamill's The Light in the Dark is having its world premiere at the Chautauqua Theater Company. And I hope if you're around, you'll drop by next week for the Author's Hour, our final one, sadly, for the season. Two poets. Lenny Hay will be reading from Lost in America. David Walsh from two books, Threads, and this other book, Touchstone. And if you want to watch this or other Author's Hours, go to our YouTube channel, Friends of the Chicago Writers Center channel, put it in the search. Thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you again.
Well, wonderful. Thank you.